Here in this section on France, the historical context that shaped art in France in the time of Louis XIV, they throw all of this information at you about the movers and the shakers that turned the monarchy into an absolute monarchy. And they start with this question: how does the art of France differ from art and architecture produced elsewhere in Europe? They don't answer that question until you go a bit down the page, scrolling past this magnificent portrait of Louis XIV, to this comment: the arts, like everything else, came under royal control. They sometimes are very quiet in their tone about things that are immensely important. This is one of them. In 1635, Cardinal Richelieu had founded the French Royal Academy, directing the members to compile a definitive dictionary and a grammar of the French language. So you're getting a kind of elite educational institution under Richelieu that then branches out into a second institution in 1648, a Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. This is really significant in the history of art. The founding of a Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture is a major advance in the status of art and artists in Europe. It means that painting and sculpture are now defined as an elite activity that belongs at the top of the social hierarchy, associated with intellectual achievement. That's what this painting depicting the assembling together of Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture members, that they are together to discuss what makes for an elevated painting that enlightens the mind. That's very different than what painters, sculptors, and other forms of art and artisans had been. This is a painting of stonemasons constructing a cathedral in medieval France. It's from the 1200s. And you can see that the stonemasons are humble workers doing back-breaking work, trudging up ladders, supporting heavy mortar. They're laborers. There was no dignity or let alone exaltation to being a maker, a creator in this context. In that period, art could be meaningful. The artwork itself could be meaningful and exalted if it served God and King. But here you see that the creators of the artwork, a monk who is making the manuscript that we're looking at, these creators are anonymous. They do not sign their work. They do not have any personal sense of achievement or glory from their being an artist. That changes a little bit in the Renaissance. We start to see more of an assertion of personal pride from artists in the 1400s, such as this artist. But notice that he's certainly lower in status than his clients, who are aristocrats or very wealthy merchants. And mostly artists, even very proudly accomplished artists like this one, were known for being skilled tradespeople. They worked with their hands. There was no concept that they were exalted creators of innovative visions. They were respected if they could be responsible, professional, efficient in the use of materials, if they got the job done, if they were reliable. So you see that he's displaying all of these vessels that he can make with his metalworking skills and showing off the material, how they're well polished, well manufactured. This was not about art as kind of an intellectual statement. So this is very important because academies are the wave of the future. In the 1700s, academies will be founded in other places, notably London. So here is a painting of the academicians, and again, they are having learned conversations. The model is nude, and you might think, well, that's a little bizarre to have all these guys in clothes standing around talking about the nude, but we're to understand that they are talking about the heritage of the Greek and Roman past, and that this means that art, when it is a classicist art, a classicizing art based in classical values, is carrying on a grand tradition of philosophically profound ideas. So notice the word academy. I've actually pointed out for you that this is a word that comes from Latin and Greek. And it is basically named after the place where Plato was teaching, right? And so we know this because today, I'm sure you're familiar, if you go to an elementary school that calls itself an academy, well, that sounds like a school that is claiming to be rather elite. And so the idea of an academy is saying that the arts are not manual labor. They are humanities, an enterprise of the mind. And the idea was that they do this because drawing, with its skill in anatomy and life drawing, such as this nude figure, requires understanding of the classical past. It requires tremendous skill in precision and measurement. And it requires engaging with the great stories of the classical past, the heroes of antiquity, the figures from the literature of Greece and Rome. And of course, as I've stressed again and again, classicism we see in art is the kind of grand tradition in Western art, and a tradition associated with power and authority, and used to uphold the power and authority of the ruling class. So the founding of the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture marks elite art getting recognized as worthy of royal attention, of royal recognition, of royal support, but it also means coming under royal control. That part of the absolute monarchy of Louis XIV will be that the art will express who he is, what his rule is about, by teaching high art values, by teaching classicism, by promoting it, by producing it. And this also involves a control on how the king is represented. So part of the academy is setting down rules and guidelines for how things are to be done correctly. What is the superior, the correct, the approved version? And this will certainly be the case for how the king is to be represented. So remember, Charles Le Brun, he designed the Hall of Mirrors. He is directing this academy and setting down these guidelines. So one thing to understand is we've been dealing with a hierarchy of art forms. We talked about still life, flower painting being at the bottom of the hierarchy, landscape and genre painting, and then human history painting, stories of human life or biblical stories being at the top. This is a tremendously hierarchical world in terms of its social and political structure, and this kind of sense of hierarchy of what is inferior and superior will be throughout the membership, which will involve conflicts about what is the correct style. And this will all hinge on what is actually truly classical. This conflict will be divided into those who are called the Rubenists, after Rubens, and those called the Poussinists, after Poussin. Those two painters stand for a broader idea of what is the status of color versus design. Poussin is one of the great landscape painters of the 17th century, and his landscapes are incredibly important because they're not only beautiful with trees and water and sky, but they are a vision of landscape as not a low genre, but a noble genre, a high genre, and a classical genre. They're classical, a painting like this, because Poussin is putting St. John, one of the writers of the 4 books of the Christian Bible, he's placed in this scene right at the center. And so it has a kind of human figure of noble purpose. It's also elevated in that we have the kind of architecture of the Roman Empire, of the classical past shown here. This is not a landscape of Poussin's time in 1640. It is meant to be a landscape of the time that was the original beginning of Christianity, the time of the ancient Roman Empire. But it's also classical in that the space is so measured and precise as it moves back in gradual, even progression from foreground to middle ground to background. There's such a sense of calm placement and clear form. Look how we have clear cylinders, clear square forms, pure geometric shapes. And the trees themselves feel tidy. They have the kind of irregularity of nature, and yet they have a kind of tidy quality in the way that they frame foreground, middle ground, the side to side, creating a sense of everything in a balanced compositional relationship. Whereas Rubin feels like this swirling mass of bodies, and his design, according to the Academy painters, is much too pulsating with chaotic tension and energy going in many directions, and it doesn't have a kind of classical clarity. He was called a colorist because the idea of those in the Academy who emphasize the Rubinists, the Rubin school, is that the color is overpowering the clarity of drawing and design. And this tension between whether color or design are the principal elements in an artwork, the defining spirit, if you will, of the artwork. These go back to Titian, a painter in the Renaissance in the 1500s, and Michelangelo. Now, of course, Titian draws and designs, he places things, but notice how there's a kind of soft fluidity to his figures, the way the forms are defined. And instead, he seems to sort of compose with color, the laying down of color against color, the pink, peach, gold, purpley blues, those all seem to act as compositional elements, whereas Michelangelo gives you very precise forms. And then he seems to fill those forms in with color. There's a sense of control, of well-defined structure. And so I want you to really understand this because it's going to persist into the 19th century. It will be, this idea of the colorist versus the design, the colore versus the disegno, the Poussin school and the Rubin school, this is going to be playing out as we move forward. So here are two artists we are going to look at closely in the 19th century. I'm not going to tell you who they are because I think it will be more fun when you learn about them to see if you can come back and guess who's who. But I would ask you right now to check with yourself, which of these artists, the one painting the woman on the left in the dress or the one painting the man on the right in the green tie, which of them is a colorist and which is using the principles of disegno, which is a Poussin school artist, which is a Rubin school artist. Think about that. If it's not clear to you, let's talk about it, because I made this purposely, I hope, a little bit tricky to get your mind working. You'll have to let me know.